Captain Reynolds stood firm on the deck of the naval destroyer, his gaze cutting through the dense morning fog that clung to the restless sea below. The ship creaked and groaned as waves pounded its hull, a constant reminder of the unforgiving nature of the ocean and the weight of command that rested squarely on his shoulders. Today was different, though. The air carried a charged energy as if the very atmosphere anticipated the storm that brewed not just in the sky but within the ranks of the crew. Reynolds was a man forged by decades of service, a leader known for his unyielding discipline and sharp tactical mind. Yet there was an undercurrent of unease gnawing at him, something beyond the usual stress of naval operations, a subtle tension crackled in the salty breeze that brushed against his face, signaling a confrontation he could not yet name. The ship's crew moved with practiced efficiency, but their eyes betrayed a shared apprehension. Whispers floated through the corridors, and even the seasoned officers spoke in hushed tones. The SEAL team had arrived at dawn, led by Lieutenant Commander Harris, a figure who commanded respect in a way that rivaled the captain himself. Harris was the embodiment of calm, deadly precision and unwavering confidence. His reputation was legendary, whispered in the shadows of covert operations and battles few had ever seen. The men under his command looked to him as more than just an officer. They followed him with a loyalty born of shared danger and unspoken trust. Yet his presence on this naval vessel was an anomaly, a wild card thrown into the strict chain of command that Reynolds prided himself on maintaining. Reynolds clenched his jaw as he watched Harris stride onto the deck, the leather boots of the SEAL leader thudding softly, but with purpose. Each step seemed to cut through the mounting tension like a blade. The captain's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, tucked just beneath his jacket, a gesture both instinctual and symbolic. This was his ship and his mission, but Harris carried a different kind of authority, one that challenged the very foundation of naval discipline and hierarchy. The captain's mind raced, trying to anticipate the intentions behind the SEAL's arrival. The orders were classified, but rumors swirled that the SEALs had been brought in for a critical covert operation, one that might require breaking protocol and bending rules. Reynolds was no stranger to high stakes, but this was a test unlike any he had faced before. The crew gathered at attention, their eyes flicking nervously between the captain and the SEAL leader. The air was thick with unspoken questions and the weight of impending conflict. The first officer stood rigid beside Reynolds, ready to enforce the chain of command, but even he seemed uncertain about how this confrontation would unfold. A sudden sharp gust of wind swept across the deck, carrying the distant echo of a foghorn that seemed to mark the countdown to an inevitable clash. Suddenly, the captain drew his weapon, a slow, deliberate motion meant to assert control. But before his hand could settle, Harris was beside him, a shadow moving with impossible speed and precision. The SEAL's voice was low, yet carried a power that cut through the tension like a knife. "Captain, you don't understand the bigger threat out there? The enemy is closer than you think, and the way forward requires more than rank. It requires trust and the ability to follow when necessary." Reynolds froze for a heartbeat, the cold weight of the pistol in his hand suddenly meaningless in the face of those words. The crew held their breath, watching the delicate dance between two men who embodied authority, yet represented very different worlds. The captain was used to being the one who made decisions, the final arbiter of strategy and discipline. But Harris spoke of a mission that transcended those boundaries, a mission that demanded a different kind of leadership, one that could not be won with titles alone. The silence stretched long and heavy with expectation. Then Harris stepped back, his eyes never leaving Reynolds' face. It was a silent challenge, a test of will that left the captain wrestling with a decision that could alter everything. He lowered his weapon slowly, his fingers trembling just slightly, but the message was clear. The battle for command had only just begun, and the sea around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would truly emerge as the leader in this deadly game. The fog thickened once more, swallowing the ship and its crew in a cloak of uncertainty. The waves continued their relentless assault, and somewhere beyond the horizon, danger waited unseen, ready to strike. The captain looked once more at the SEAL leader and realized that this moment was a crossroads where past rules and new realities collided, forcing them both into a fragile, uneasy alliance built on suspicion and necessity. The true test was still ahead, and neither man could predict what price they would pay for control of the ship and its mission. The moment the captain lowered his weapon, the weight on the deck seemed to shift, as if the invisible scales of authority were balancing on a knife's edge. Lieutenant Commander Harris took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Captain Reynolds' face. The crew remained frozen in place, caught between respect and fear, uncertain of who would take control of the unfolding situation. The tension hung thick like a heavy fog that refused to lift as the waves crashed relentlessly against the hull. The distant cries of seabirds were swallowed by the oppressive silence that blanketed the ship. Harris spoke next, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Captain, there are forces at work here that you cannot see, things that threaten not just this mission, but the lives of everyone aboard. This operation is not like any other. This is a covert mission where flexibility and rapid decisions are essential. I need the authority to act without hesitation to protect the crew and accomplish the objective." Reynolds looked into the eyes of the SEAL leader and saw a fire burning there, a determination forged in countless battles, a willingness to carry burdens few could imagine. The captain's pride wrestled with reality. His world was built on order and protocol, but this man was asking him to relinquish control to someone who played by different rules, rules that could either save or doom them all. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the murmur of whispers growing louder, but quickly silenced by the sharp glance of Harris, who commanded obedience without raising his voice. Suddenly, the ship jolted sharply, tremor that rippled through the steel bones of the destroyer, warning them that danger was no longer a distant threat, but fast approaching. The captain's first officer moved to secure the bridge, but Harris raised a hand, stopping him. This was no ordinary attack, and the way forward was far from clear. Harris moved swiftly now, barking orders to the SEAL team and the crew alike. His voice cut through the confusion, directing men to strategic positions, reinforcing defenses and readying equipment. The captain watched carefully the precision of Harris's commands, the way the men responded without hesitation or question. It was a dance of survival that Reynolds had seen before, but never under his own command. His mind raced, trying to calculate the risks, the costs, and the unknown variables in play. The SEAL leader's confidence was both reassuring and unsettling, a reminder that the rules of engagement had shifted in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, a crackling voice came over the radio, a panicked report of unidentified vessels closing in fast. The radar screens flickered, showing blips that moved with deadly intent. The captain felt his pulse quicken, the old instincts rising, but the SEAL's steady presence kept the panic at bay. Harris approached the bridge with a small team of operatives, their faces hardened by experience and resolve. The captain's eyes narrowed, studying them all, wondering what secrets they carried, what hidden dangers lurked beneath their calm exteriors. Harris leaned close and spoke in a low voice. "Captain, the enemy is not just outside the ship. It is inside as well. There are threats we cannot see and betrayals that cut deeper than any bullet. We have to trust each other even when it feels impossible. This mission will test loyalties and break old alliances. If we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic." The captain swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle in his gut. The crew needed a leader who could unite them. But could he be that leader when every move was shadowed by doubt? The radio crackled again, a new voice cutting through the static with a cryptic warning. The enemy has infiltrated the ship. Prepare for internal sabotage. The room fell silent for a moment as the gravity of the situation hit like a tidal wave. The captain looked at Harris and then at his own officers. Realization dawned that this was not just a battle against an external foe, but a war waged in the shadows within their own ranks. The line between friend and enemy blurred dangerously, and the question remained, who could be trusted? Harris took charge, ordering immediate lockdown procedures, sealing compartments, and initiating counterintelligence protocols. His men moved with lethal efficiency, checking every inch of the ship and interrogating suspicious crew members. The captain followed closely, his mind torn between suspicion and the desperate need to maintain order. The fragile trust between the Navy and the SEAL team was the only thing standing between survival and disaster. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside as the ship plunged deeper into the fog of uncertainty. The captain and the SEAL leader found themselves locked in a silent battle of wills neither willing to concede yet forced to cooperate. Harris's gaze met Reynolds once more, his expression unreadable but filled with unspoken challenge. The captain knew the real test was not just in repelling the enemy attack, but in navigating the treacherous waters of command, where every decision could be a matter of life and death. Suddenly the lights flickered, plunging the ship into darkness for a heartbeat before emergency generators kicked in, casting eerie shadows. Across the deck, the crew tensed, ready for an ambush. Or worse, the captain gripped the rail. His knuckles white, but the SEAL leader was already moving a ghost in the half-light, signaling his team forward. The enemy was closing in from every direction, visible and invisible. And the only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The chaos on board the naval destroyer escalated as alarms blared, piercing the tense silence like a sudden explosion. The ship lurched violently, throwing men off balance and sending unsecured equipment crashing against steel walls. The captain gripped the railing, struggling to maintain his footing, his heart pounding in his chest as the reality of the attack set in. Around him, the crew scrambled to their stations, their faces masks of determination and fear. The once orderly deck had become a battlefield where every second could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Lieutenant Commander Harris moved with calculated precision, his voice cutting through the pandemonium, issuing rapid commands that rippled through the crew like a well-oiled machine. His SEAL team worked seamlessly, coordinating defensive maneuvers and securing critical points across the ship. The captain watched closely the fluidity of Harris's leadership. The unspoken bond between the SEALs and the sailors was tangible, a force stronger than rank or protocol. The SEAL leader was not just commanding men, he was inspiring them, igniting a fierce will to fight and survive that spread like wildfire. Suddenly the radar blipped again, a cluster of fast-moving enemy boats closing in with deadly speed. The captain felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him. The ship was vulnerable, exposed to an attack that could come from multiple directions, and the lines between friend and foe had never been more blurred. Harris turned to Reynolds, his eyes intense. "We need to move quickly, Captain. The enemy will strike hard and fast. We cannot afford hesitation." The captain nodded grimly, signaling the crew to brace for impact. The SEAL leader's confidence was infectious, but beneath it lurked a cold calculation that left no room for error. The destroyer's guns roared to life, tearing through the fog with bursts of light and sound as the crew fought desperately to keep the enemy at bay. The ship shook violently from the impacts, the sound of explosions echoing through the corridors like thunder. The captain felt the sting of shrapnel in his arm, but refused to falter. His presence was a beacon in the storm, rallying the men around him. Yet even as the battle raged, the threat of sabotage within their own ranks lingered like a ghost, waiting to strike at the worst possible moment. In the midst of the chaos, Harris spotted a flicker of movement near the engineering bay. a shadow slipping through the darkness with unnatural speed. The SEAL leader's instincts screamed a warning, and he signaled a small team to intercept the captain, followed cautiously, their footsteps swallowed by the roar of the battle outside. The tension was suffocating as they moved deeper into the ship, the familiar now transformed into a maze of danger and deceit. The enemy was no longer just outside. The hull, it was inside their sanctuary. As they closed in, the team found signs of forced entry, tampered equipment, and discarded weapons clues pointing to an internal traitor working in the shadows. Harris's voice was low but fierce. "This is what? We feared, Captain. Someone here is working against us, sabotaging our efforts and feeding the enemy information." The captain swallowed hard, feeling the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. The crew was a family forged in the crucible of war. But now that bond was cracked, threatening to shatter under the strain. Back on the bridge, the captain wrestled with the impossible choice of rooting out the traitor without destroying morale or trust among his men. Every face held a question. Every glance was a potential threat. Reynolds's authority wavered under the weight of suspicion. The SEAL leader's words echoed in his mind. Trust and follow when necessary. But how could he trust when the enemy wore the face of a comrade? The question hung like a storm cloud ready to burst with devastating consequences. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life. A garbled message barely audible through the static but unmistakable in its urgency. Enemy boarding party detected on the starboard side. Prepare to repel boarders. The captain's heart skipped a beat. The attack was coming closer faster than anyone had anticipated. Harris moved swiftly, coordinating the defense sealing bulkheads and deploying men to choke points. The ship became a fortress under siege where every corridor was a potential battleground and every shadow a hiding place for death. The captain and the SEAL leader locked eyes once more, a silent understanding passing between them. Neither could afford to hesitate. The survival of the ship depended on their uneasy alliance and the fragile trust they were forced to build amidst the fire. The ship shook again, a harsh reminder that the enemy was relentless and the war far from over. The captain gripped his sidearm, feeling its cold weight grounding him in the maelstrom of uncertainty. The question that haunted him was no longer who was in command, but whether they would live to see the dawn. The smoke hung thick over the deck as the last echoes of gunfire faded into an eerie silence. The ship rocked gently beneath the heavy sky, the battle scars visible in twisted metal, shattered glass, and the exhausted faces of the crew. Captain Reynolds stood at the bridge, surveying the aftermath, his eyes tired but sharp. The enemy had been repelled, but the cost was etched deep in every corner of the destroyer. The tension that had gripped the ship since the first warning was now replaced by a fragile calm. Yet beneath it lay a storm of doubt and unresolved questions. "Lieutenant." Commander Harris moved beside the captain, his expression unreadable, a mask carved from years of combat and survival. The SEAL team had done what many thought impossible. They had turned the tide and saved the ship. But the victory felt hollow. The internal threat had been neutralized, but the scars of betrayal lingered like a wound refusing to heal. The captain looked at Harris and saw more than just a soldier. He saw a man who had forced him to confront the limits of his own authority and the price of control. The crew began to gather their strength, repairing damage, checking supplies, and tending to the wounded. The camaraderie that bound them was tested, but not broken. Yet in the quiet moments, the captain could feel the fragile threads of trust stretching thin. Every glance held unspoken questions. Every whispered conversation was laced with suspicion. The SEAL leader's presence had shifted the balance of power on the ship, and the captain wondered if the alliance they forged in battle could survive the storms ahead. Reynolds turned to Harris, the weight of command heavy in his voice. "Lieutenant Commander, the ship is ours again, but who truly commands it now?" The question hung in the air, a challenge neither man could answer. Easily, Harris met his gaze steady and calm. The mission comes first. Captain, and the crew needs a leader willing to make the hard decisions, even if it means sharing the burden. The captain nodded slowly, realizing that control was no longer a matter of rank, but of trust and respect, earned in the crucible of fire. Suddenly, a message crackled over the radio, breaking the fragile peace. A coded signal intercepted, indicating that the enemy was regrouping, planning a counterattack. The battle was not over, and the shadows that haunted the ship promised more dangers lurking beyond the horizon. Reynolds felt a chill, knowing that this was only the beginning of a longer war, one that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and command. The captain steadied himself, ready to face whatever came next, with the uneasy alliance beside him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, the captain and the SEAL leader stood together, watching the endless sea, a silent acknowledgement, passing between them that the war for command was far from over. Yet in that moment of uneasy truce, they found something rare, a glimpse of unity forged in fire and blood. The ship sailed onward into the unknown, with two men bound by fate and a mission that demanded more than just orders, but a willingness to trust, even when the price was uncertain. The night grew darker, and the crew settled into a tense vigilance, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential threat. The captain looked out at the vast emptiness, knowing that the real battle was not just against enemies outside, but against the doubts and fears within. The ship was more than steel and machinery. It was a fragile world where every decision carried weight, where leadership was a balance of strength and humility. And so the story ended not with a decisive victory, but with a question lingering in the salty air: who was really in command of the destroyer, the captain, the SEAL, or something greater than either of them? The answer lay hidden in the tides ahead, in the battles yet to be fought, and the fragile trust that might one day turn into true command.